here I am. In the book, I'm trying to take a new angle, or at least what I perceive to be a new angle in discussing the 5 pillars of Islam. When I was studying Islam as a non-Muslim, and I came across books that dealt with this subject, I inevitably found that it was covered in a very dry and sort of mechanical fashion. The pillars were described in detail as far as how to perform them. Several hadith about their merits were quoted, and that was the extent of it. And as a non-Muslim, as an atheist, as a matter of fact, considering this religion, out of curiosity mostly, I found that this subject was perhaps one of the least inspiring, as it's often covered in texts on Islam. It was inevitably the least inspiring chapter. The reason being because, as an American, when I thought of faith back in those days, I thought of the spiritual side of faith. To me, as an American, faith meant something spiritual. So when I came upon the Islamic rituals, I expected to find something deeply spiritual and profound. And inevitably, I found it to be very dry and matter-of-fact. And I was greatly disappointed. So today, I would like you to sit there for a while and think about how you would take a fellow like me back in those days and how you would explain to him your experience of the pillars of Islam. What do they mean to you? What do they do for you? What do you get out of them? What do you accomplish by doing them? And remember that you're talking to somebody that didn't grow up in your tradition. So even though I know this subject that I'm about to discuss is well known to all of you, I want this to be an exercise for all of us. An exercise in trying to communicate one of the most important elements of our religion to those who are not of our religion. This is my own attempt, and I hope you will formulate your own, because when you do communicate your belief, your faith, experience to non-Muslims, you do have to do it, I believe, in a way that's personal, so that that is what will move them. That will be what will make them appreciate your faith experience. So in other words, I don't want you to mimic what I'm saying here today. I want you to internalize these questions yourself, and hopefully, and to communicate that personal experience of faith to others. It's important to remember that when I'm about to give this lecture, that I was an atheist for many, many years. From the time I was about 16 to the time I was 28. Because that'll help you to understand the first story I'm going to begin with this lecture with. Because when you're an atheist, you reject God outright. And when you do such a thing, you're committing a grave and dangerous wrong. Grave and dangerous because you are harming yourself, your soul, your person, in very profound ways. And when you convert to Islam, there's a lot of repair work to do. Because you've done such damage to yourself. You've built up so much pride, so much vanity, so many harmful qualities, that it's going to take some time to break them down and to build all over again and to construct your character. The account I'm about to begin this story with is not flattering to me. It's actually very embarrassing. And I have a difficult time sharing it with you, because it doesn't put me in a very good light. But I do think it says something about the mercy and the glory and the grandeur of God, of Allah, the Almighty and the Merciful. And for that reason, I share it with you. Before I begin that story, I would just like to tell you something, a quote that an imam of a masjid in San Francisco once said to me when I asked him about his experience of prayer. He said, "And when we pray and put our nose to the ground, we feel a joy, a rest, a strength, that is outside this world, and no words could ever truly describe. You just have to experience it to know. Of all the words I ever heard in my life, those words were the words that unlocked the key in my soul that got me to the stage where I was ready to become a Muslim. On the day I converted to Islam, the Imam of the student masjid gave me a manual on how to perform salat, the Islamic prayer rituals. Take it easy, the Muslim students told me. Don't push yourself too hard. It's better to take your time. You know, slowly, slowly. First time I heard that expression. Slowly, slowly. Slowly, slowly. I'd hear it a lot after that. I was dumbfounded. I was surprised by their concern. How hard could it be to pray, I wondered. When I was back in my childhood, I prayed all the time. It didn't seem pretty effortless. In any case, that same night, I decided to ignore their advice, which I typically do, and I decided to start performing the 5 prayers at their appointed scheduled times. So I sat for a long time on my couch in the small, dimly lit living room of my Diamond Heights apartment in San Francisco, studying and rehearsing the prayer postures. I also studied and rehearsed the verses of the Qur'an that I needed to recite, and the supplications that I would have to make. Now, much of what I had to say would be in Arabic, so I had not only to memorize the meaning, but I had to memorize the Arabic transliterations and their interpretations that the manual provided. So I pored over this manual for a couple of hours at least, maybe 3 and even 4, before I felt confident enough to attempt my first Islamic prayer. And it was close to midnight, so I decided to perform the Isha prayer. Well, I walked into the bathroom, where the vanity is, placed the manual on the sink counter, and with it open to the section that described how to perform the washing for the prayer, I opened it up and I started to follow the instructions very meticulously. I was like a cook trying a recipe for the first time. I was sort of following the instructions and looking over here and doing this, and they gave pictures. When I was done, I shut off the faucet and returned to my living room. And with water still dripping from various parts of my body, for the instructions stated that it's preferable not to dry oneself with a towel after you wash for the prayer, I stood there dripping and trying to approximate the right direction. So I stood in the center of the room, aimed myself in the direction of what I hoped was Mecca, although I'd never been there before. I glanced back over my shoulder then to make sure that the apartment door was secured and locked. As frankly, I was a little bit embarrassed and nervous. I didn't want any neighbors passing by or knocking on the door, pushing it open and saying, "What's Jeff doing now?" Turned around, looked at the door. It was locked. It was bolted. Checked again, just the second time, making sure again. Definitely it was locked and bolted. And then I looked straight ahead, straightened my stance, took a very deep breath, raised my hands to the side of my face with my palms open and my thumbs touching my earlobes, and then in a very hushed voice, I pronounced, "Allahu Akbar." And I hoped no one heard me. I felt a little bit anxious, a little bit embarrassed, even a little bit humiliated. I couldn't rid myself of the feeling that someone was out there somewhere spying on me. Then I suddenly realized, and I was seized with panic, that I had left the curtains to my living room open. What if a neighbor should look in and see me, I thought. I stopped what I was doing, went to the window, flashed the light outside, looked around the backyard. Thank God it was empty. Okay, so I drew the curtains carefully to a close, made sure that they overlapped so nobody could peek through any